questions about where are we exactly with this regulation and what is going on, and how that's going to affect you guys in the districts. So feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along, or just come off your mic and ask questions as we go along. The actual code of law, was passed and effective um, a few years ago. Our regulation piece was supposed to be done January of 2024, but we are a little bit behind, changing folks at our administrative level kind of put us a little bit behind. But the legislation is pretty simple. It's just requiring us to set standards for minimal adequacy for our interpreters. The law is already passed for us as a Department of Education to create regulations for that minimal adequacy for interpreters. That law, the legislation has not, passed any regulations up to this point, and we'll kind of walk through that. July of 2024 was our first drafting notice that we published in the state register. There's always a drafting notice that goes out, and then a month for written comments, which we did not get any. October 1st was our first board meeting to be the first reading of the regulations. Then there's another time period till November 25th, where written comments can be sent. And then our second reading was December 3rd. That's also a public hearing, which a few different groups did show up at that public hearing to make comments on the regulation. January 14th, that regulation, or December 3rd, during our second reading, it did pass the State Board of Education. And that only means that it goes on to the legislation, and the legislation has to pass that regulation. So it went to the legislation January 14th. The Senate Education Subcommittee met February 2nd, and they did vote to move the regulation to the full subcommittee. But then on February 12th, we met with the regulation subcommittee, and they did vote not to send it to the full regulation subcommittee. So they basically, said no. It's not going any further at this point. Next steps are going to include a meeting that they will arrange, that regulation subcommittee, with SCAD and our office. SCAD was the only public comment group that showed up at that regulation subcommittee meeting. And they really did strongly take into account the comments that SCAD made. SCAD is wanting a minimum starting point for interpreters of an EPA score of 3.5 and a bachelor's degree. That's not what we're asking for. They did seem to understand when we talked about the number of interpreters we would lose at 3.5. But they did ask a number of questions to SCAD in particular, regarding virtual interpreting and what that's like and how accurate it is. And so, the regulation did, kind of buys us a little time as we have to go back to the drawing board. The regulation that we put forth, we were required in that law to work with SCRID and SCAD and come to, to a regulation that we can all live with. We did have to take into account, what the loss of interpreters would be. And so, we were starting with a 3.2 EPA score, a high school diploma, passing the written test, the same, a statement that the applicant has read, understands that National Association of Interpreters Code of Ethics, and then the background check, which I'm sure most districts do. And then adding it, that would be the point next school year where a timeline for completion of 60 hours of continuing education would take place, would start. And then phase 2 would be 5 years from that school year, where we would be looking at an EPA score of 3.7 and associate's degree. And then another 5 years going into phase 3, which would be the ultimate goal of having an EPA score of 4.0 and a bachelor's degree. So, just to give you an example where other states are, 22 are at that 3.5. 14 are at 4.0, 5 are unregulated. That includes us in South Carolina. And 4 are regulated but have no EPA requirement, just an education level and a CEU requirement level as well. What the 2 points that the regulation subcommittee really struggled with was at 3.2, a score of 3.2, that interpreter is most likely interpreting around 60% of what they hear to the student. And they tell you they did not like that. They thought that how can any child understand content and learn when they're only getting 60%? They also struggled with the 60 continuing education hours. So those were the 2 points I think that will be up for further discussion with the regulation subcommittee when they get the meeting set up. But both the South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind and Clemson Interpreting Center do provide professional development throughout the year. I know Clemson has a summer, some summer sessions. School for the Deaf and Blind, they're providing some sessions at our Summer Institute with our SE teams. The testing for the written portion and the performance portion are paid for by Clemson Interpreting Center. So if you take your test through Clemson's Interpreting Center, and they offer the test all around the state, not just in the upstate, but that test would be paid for. They offer those several times a year throughout the state, so there's lots of opportunities. The written portion you can request at any time. It's a computer-based assessment that you just can take online and have the scores are instantaneous for that assessment. The performance portion is the one that's more difficult, where somebody is videotaped interpreting, and that is sent to Boys Town to get tested and to get a score back. At which point now it's taking about 8 months to get those scores back. Clemson does keep a list of interpreters but it's voluntary for interpreters in South Carolina to register with Clemson. And so, if for who they had on their list, they did send out, when the most recent performance tests were going to be available, and did let those folks know that we're under a 3.5, just in case. We really don't know where the regulation's going to end, but that test was available in October, and those test scores would be back most likely by the start of the school year. I think they only had maybe 3 people sign up. So kind of interesting. But any questions anybody has on that? There is no law currently in place for no regulation in place for interpreters at this moment. I know I had talked to Robert Hill at School for the Deaf and Blind Outreach Center, and he had said, "Oh, I might have given some districts the wrong information. So could you, he was going to backtrack." And we just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of where we're at with this, and keep you guys up to date. We will keep everybody up to date on, where this goes once the legislation calls us back. Any questions in the chat? Sarah, can you see the chat?
Yes, I can see the chat, and no, there are no questions in the
Okay.
chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The new SLD eligibility form. So Sarah put this on the Google Drive. I think she's got it in the chat as well. And it will be on EdPlan to replace the current eligibility checklist that's there, or worksheet. And I'm going to cut off for 1 second and show you this, kind of walk through this form. Hopefully it's helping part of our stakeholder group. You can't put a form easily into a, a PowerPoint. It just doesn't kind of work very well. But this was the result of, several sessions and back and forth on Google Drive, shared documents with the SLD stakeholder group. But basically, it's hopefully going to make it a lot easier to look at learning disabilities. It just goes pretty simple: significant sub-average academic skills. And we're looking at all the areas that you can qualify under SLD, basic reading skills, or often it's called word level reading disorder. That's kind of the new language in research, or as we all, from more familiar with as well, dyslexia. So whatever you want to call it in IDEA, it is called a word level, basic reading skills level learning disability, as evidenced by. So any of these assessments on the list that you would have information that leads you to suspect a learning disability, you're going to check that. As the language reads, it's a preponderance of evidence, not one thing. So you're looking at, all of these areas. If reading fluency is an issue, that's measuring accuracy, rate, and prosody. You're looking at, as evidenced by, which of these following assessments may have shown you evidence that there's a possible learning disability in reading fluency. And then reading comprehension the same way. And I'm sorry to scroll, but and then the same is for math calculation, also known as dyscalculia, and math problem solving as well. So it's kind of a checklist that's a little bit more comprehensive: written expression, then oral expression, and listening comprehension. And then the second part of the criteria is, has the child been provided learning experiences and instruction appropriate for the child's age or state approved grade level standards in the area of concern? And I get a lot of feedback that, well, there was no intervention provided, and how do we look at a private school student and a homeschooled student? This is the only area that, you you could be getting information equating something to an intervention that's required in the criteria. But it's really, was the student provided appropriate core instruction? Was it provided with fidelity? Were evidence-based tier interventions provided that aligned to the student's skill deficits? And was progress monitoring data from intervention used to show well, that's a mistake. Progress or lack of progress with interventions. And we'll get that fixed. How many times we look over a document and don't find the errors? But once again, it's not that you have to have every single box checked. But as much as you possibly can, that would lend itself to a learning disability. And then looking at the exclusionary factors. Underachievement is not primarily the result of and checking off all those, and then looking at adverse educational impact and the need for specially designed instruction. And we get a lot of comments about what is adverse educational impact. And it's basically the child is not functioning on grade level academically in math, in reading, in written expression, or any of the other areas under learning disability. And then what the decision was. And so the team did set evidence of possible disability can include scores. So we did set some cut scores, in the does not meet expectation range on SC Ready, taking into account your local norms or your building level norms. As some districts said, I could have one building whose norms are very different than another building. So I would rather look at building level norms than district level norms. So on CBMs at or below the 10th percentile, again, taking into account your local norms. And on standardized assessments at or below the 10th percentile, taking into account the standard error of measure and also taking into account your local norms. If 30% of your kids in a building are performing below the 10th percentile, then that 10th percentile may not be a good number for that building. Hopefully you don't have a building where 30% are performing below the 10th percentile, because that's more than having 30% of your kids having a learning disability. That has to do with core instruction, that has to do with how students are being taught, and a lot of other factors, but most likely not a disability factor. And just remembering it's a preponderance of evidence that should be used to determine the presence of a specific disability and not a single test or score. And if you close your eyes just for 1 minute, so I'm going to scroll way up to the top, you will see in each category where it says intervention data. If you don't have intervention data, but you have enough of these other boxes checked, intervention data you may not have. We have a lot of homeschool kids or private school kids. That's not going to be something that you have. But do you have other areas of concern that are, showing scores that would be in, a significant range that would lend itself to a child having a learning disability? Okay. Any questions on that? And we do have an SLD guide that we've wrapped up last week, but it really has to go through, this doesn't have to go through ART for us, this form, but the SLD guide has to go through our system of approval from our office and then above us and get approved, go through our Office of General Counsel. And as soon as that happens, we'll get that guide out there. And Katie did inform me we can put that on EdPlan as well, so that it's easy to access.
Excuse me, Lisa, there is one
Sure.
comment or question in the chat. It says, for the yes, no check boxes, could you add language to include not all have to be checked yes? In practice, I anticipate IEP teams saying the student is not eligible if one of those are marked no.
Right. So it's as evidenced by check all that apply. So if you're evaluating a child that has a family history of learning disabilities, you're going to check that box. Yes, they have a family history. If you did some phonological processing assessment and you got some really low scores, you're going to check yes, there are. That is some more evidence of a learning disability. What is the educational history? Has the child always struggled? What kind of CBM data have you collected? Where are they benchmarking on those universal screeners with the rest of students in that grade level? Looking at district and state assessments, have they all been significantly, low? What, did your SLP do an assessment of oral language, and was that an issue? Because we know oral language and basic reading skills, go hand in hand. Any observations you did during reading instruction, did you see some red flags that would suggest that this child is definitely struggling in this area? So you're really checking all that apply to support a learning disability. And, it can't be one thing. As we said at the top, we can't use any single measure as, determining whether that child is a child with a disability. And, if you have a child who scored at the 14th percentile on achievement assessments, but I checked 6 boxes here. I said, well, they were really low in phonological processing. Rapid automatic naming was low. Working memory was low. There's a family history. CBM data or universal screeners have consistently been low. Then that 14% on achievement scores you've got to really look at that and say, well, sometimes it only takes 1 or 2 questions that you get right or wrong to change that 14% to a 10% a, or a 12%. So, no one single measure. There's nothing easy about learning disabilities, diagnosing learning disabilities. It's a problem-solving model. There's no one like, here's a definitive check. Yes, you have this, check yes. It is a problem-solving model, and it's a team decision and something you have to talk about as a team in your district that's, evaluating a student.
Yeah.
That makes
Lisa,
any sense.
It does, but Lisa, she said the boxes below that she added after you started
Oh,
talking,
okay.
and then someone else chimed in and said,
The learning
asked
experiences.
where
Yeah.
adverse impacts. Okay, Tabitha,
Yeah.
if you want to come off mute and
Hey,
just
Lisa, it's Tabitha that's asking the
Hey.
question, and I appreciate the thorough response on the check all that applies. It's the one that is the learning experience box table on the yes
Yes.
nos there.
Okay.
That's
Sure.
the one that I'm referring to. Like,
Okay.
is there somewhere we can put there? Because I anticipate, especially that last
Mhm.
question with the yes no, I can see IEP
Right.
teams having the feel that they have to put yes for everything unless we do have some kind of guidance for that area.
And so where you see, I mean, you're really going to have to put yes, no, if they were provided appropriate core. You do have to address that. You would have to address provided with, fidelity. And it's not, fidelity is the instruction provided as the, publisher intended. Are you going through that reading instruction and not skipping information, and that type of thing? It's one thing for a teacher to add lots of different activities, but it's another thing when you don't provide the instruction that is in that core reading program as it's intended to be taught in the classroom. But evidence-based interventions provided that align to the student's skill deficits. So that's tier 3 or tier 2, tier 3, but we also said classroom-based, because a teacher should not be really referring a child for an evaluation to MTSS until what have they tried in the classroom. So if you don't have tier 3, if you don't have tiered intervention through MTSS, which I think now so many districts are, what classroom-based interventions took place, what was done that, was unsuccessful because the child's certainly not progressing if we're looking at a learning disability. And do you have any progress monitoring data from those interventions? And your benchmark universal screening data can serve that purpose. So in the beginning of the year, kids come back to school in fall, we did a universal screeners. If we use Dibbles or AimsWeb or FastBridge or one of those, or whatever universal screener is, then in winter, you're you're measuring again with a universal screener because you're required 3 times a year. If you've provided some classroom interventions in between those two universal screeners, has that child made some progress? It's an easy way to measure whether, any interventions the teacher in the classroom is providing is helping. And that's something, as a classroom teacher, that's what that data tells you. You'll get a set of classroom data every time, your class is benchmarked to show you which kids are improving or which are not, so maybe using some of that data as well. But yeah, we could add that, Tabitha. Any other questions?
No, I don't see anything else in the chat. Just a thank you from Tabitha.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, if we're ready to move on to the next slide, then Peter, you're up. I think this is for Peter. Yeah, the NAEP scores. Oh, wait, I have to reshare my screen. Thank you,
Okay.
Lisa.
You want to share yours, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it should come back up. Can you see it now?
Yep. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I just wanted to touch base. I mean, obviously it's been in the news, the nation's report card, as they call it sometimes. The National Assessment of Educational Progress came out with respect to reading and mathematics, 4th and 8th grade. In January, they released that data for the nation, and then the nation as a whole, and that's what's been in the news, is that all students as a whole went down for this administration. So they saw on a national level a decrease in, at least if you're looking at those students who score basic, proficient, or advanced, they saw a decline and a decline in the overall scaled score in reading and math for the most part. So anyway, if you guys aren't familiar with it, NAEP is it is a national assessment. It is basically a sampling. I did drop into the chat box, their description. It's a fairly sophisticated sampling technique that they utilize, roughly looking at maybe 10% of the students in a state being assessed, but you can look at the sampling plan if you're so inclined. So that's in there. Also in there is the actual link to the NAEP website. It does allow you to do some data analysis and look at different ways of looking at it. So this is one that I ran off of the NAEP tracker. This graph was produced by their data assessment tool. And so it's looking at average scaled scores. But the bottom line to this is that what we're seeing is the gap kind of grow, at least in this last administration. So at the bottom, you would have the darker lines are the national scores, and then the grayish lines would be our South Carolina scores. And that's the average scaled score. The one on top is for non-disabled students, and then the one line on bottom is for students with IEPs. And so you can see that that for non-disabled students in South Carolina, you can see the national trend going down on the scaled score. So it was close to 230, and now it's inching towards 220 as the average scaled score nationally. And in South Carolina, we've kind of held steady, but as the nation has gone down, South Carolina is caught up with the nation on its average scaled score and surpassed it by just a slight bit. And this is 4th grade ELA. But for students with disabilities, we started inching towards the national average, but then in this last administration slipped a little bit, which at the end of the day shows that the gap is widening, not getting closer together, which obviously is the goal. So that we want to have is just to bridge that gap as much as we possibly can between our non-disabled students and our students with IEPs. And so so that was sobering news a little bit on that, showing that we definitely need to work on it. The next slide shows Another way that they often discuss these scores is in terms of, actually, one slide back. There you go. Thank you. So last one was a scaled slide. This is a similar line chart, but it's showing a different thing. It's talking about the percentage of students scoring below basic. So they got below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced is the category. So they one measure that they often look at is how many students are scoring basic and above, or in this case, it's flipped. It's measuring how many students were scored below basic, and it's looking at non-disabled students and students with IEPs. And once again, the national is represented in blue, South Carolina in the gray, and this time it's flipped. The students with disabilities would be up top. And this is the percentage scoring below basic. So in South Carolina, we have more students scoring below basic who have IEPs than the national average. But as far as those students who are scoring below basic that are non-disabled, once again, we've kind of evened up with the national average. So once again, kind of showing a wider gap for our students with disabilities here in South Carolina. So let's look at the charts. Now this actually provides more of a summary. And if you look at the percentage of students scoring basic and above, this is 4th and 8th grade. But at the end of the day, we are below the national average. We did see some closing of the gap at some point, just 5 percentage points in 2022, but unfortunately that expanded to 7 percentage points in the most recent administration. And the test is given about every other year. You can see that they did not do it in 2021, mostly due to COVID. So we're on that 2-year pattern, and now it's on even years. So the next administration of the NAEP is scheduled for reading and math 4th and 8th grade is scheduled for 2026. They also test other subjects, but some of those are on a 4-year schedule rather than every 2 years. So we're seeing, unfortunately, we saw a slight uptick in 8th grade reading performance. We're a percentage point higher than we were in 2022, but still not really closing the gap much, as the nation held steady at 31% on that. And then the next slide is math. And once again, we're looking at 2017, 2019, 2022, and 2024. We're below the national average on that as well. We did hold steady, but the national average did go up slightly in 4th grade math, but it has been pretty steady at the 45-46% range for a while. And South Carolina has kind of gone up and down a little bit, but mostly in the 30s. So below the national average. And then 8th grade was probably the most disappointing, was the 8th grade math, where our students with IEPs, only 10% scored basic and above, as opposed to the national average of 23, which was declining from its 27% in 17 and 19. But we've seen a decline in the last 3 administrations. So this, once again, it is a sampling, and it does measure certain things, and you can read quite a bit about NAEP in the materials and on the website that I provided the link to, if you're interested. But it does give us an overall viewpoint. It allows for some comparison among states and jurisdictions and among subgroups. And it shows we have a lot of work to do. I think that that we're all committed to this work, and there is we see some gains, and we administer our state assessments a little bit more frequently, and so we're able to kind of gauge it from that, and see some gains and some progress. But we're really hoping at this time, now that we've adopted new standards in ELA, new standards in math, and we're getting our state assessments aligned with those standards, and testing those standards and getting the instruction and getting the letters training to teachers throughout the state that we're going to create this momentum that we'll see. And hopefully by 2026, we'll see some gains and the start of a trend line that's going up. So that's what we're working on. Like I said, there's a lot of things in place, and with the adoption of high quality instructional materials for both reading and math, making sure we're using those materials not only in our general ed classrooms, but also in our resource rooms, in our special education classrooms, to make sure that those students are exposed to those high quality materials. That's going to be key. But we'll keep talking about this. We'll keep working on this. But I did want to just provide you with the data that we saw based upon the nation's report card and the information that we got from the NAEP assessment that was just released in January.
Thank you, Peter. Next up, we have, whoop, come on. What's going on? There it goes. Office of Instructional Materials Teacher Survey.
Hey, everybody. So thank you for the segue about high quality instructional materials. As you all know that last fall, the new ELA materials were adopted. So Office of Instructional Materials has just asked that we help to get out the word. If you would please share this slide with your teachers, with building level administrators who might be able to get this out to the teachers. They're asking for feedback on the new ELA materials. They want to make sure that they are effective and being used as intended. So if you would please share this out. They've included a QR code, so the survey can be completed via device like a phone, or use the QR, or use the link included to complete it on a laptop. Thank you.
And just to add to Jenny's one point, we definitely wanted to make sure you guys were aware of it, because in any survey like this and a reflection on the materials used, we want to make sure that the voice of special ed teachers are heard. So that's why we just want to make sure that they're getting access to the survey, and that we have special ed teachers completing it, because we don't just want to have general ed teachers provide responses to the survey. We want to make sure it gets to our folks, and sometimes there's a disconnect. So that's why we're making sure that you as directors have it, and that you make sure your school site administrators have it, and your special ed teachers have a chance to fill it out.
Okay, Katie Heiss, you're next.
I don't have too many updates, really just reminders. The AR webinars, there's 2 of them this month, on the 10th and 13th. If you haven't registered for those already, the sessions will be recorded and then posted. So if you can't make it, that will be there for you, or if you need to watch it 3, 4, 5 times to understand the AR, those will be available to you. And then SSO, I mentioned last time that it's coming, and we'll be starting with those districts that are already using ClassLink. They already had that set up, and they'll be going in waves. So the first set of districts have not gotten their email yet, just our testing district. And so once we know that it's ready to go, I'll be sending out emails to those districts to let them know that this is coming. And then we sent out information about the updates that were done on Friday. So I know we presented at CEC on those. Phil and I did lots of clapping and celebrating that the IEP matches the tiles, so the order of the IEP, that you are no longer having to say what they're participating in, but what they're being removed from. So lots of good feedback from the changes that we made in the system, and so keep the feedback coming. We use that feedback to make those changes. So, but that's really it for me. If you need anything, you know where I am. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, Katie. Next up, we have Carrie Cannongeiser for the Skippy updates.
Thanks, Sarah. I just have a few reminders of resources that we have available through Skippy and through our partner program, Pyramid Pieces. So we know that a hot topic issue in early childhood is an increase in challenging behavior in the classrooms. So we have free resources available through the Pyramid Pieces Behavior Support Network. And these help to enhance the early childhood community by building competence and confidence to support young children with foundational skills that promote healthy relationships and prepare them for learning. There are 2 volumes to this series, Reframing Challenging Behavior and Reframing Regulation. And each of these volumes consists of a few different episodes in the series that help to there's 10-minute quick little snippet of a video and then a tip sheet that goes along with it. And we know that we cannot, unfortunately, control how children behave, but we can only control how we respond. And so by using these free resources, it really helps us to reframe and to understand a child's behavior. It provides a different way to look at the child's behavior, and it helps us to look at that function of behavior from the child's perspective. And once we understand the function or the purpose of the behavior, then we can help children learn new skills to mitigate that behavior. So this is a great resource that is readily available for anyone to check out. It is on our Pyramid Pieces website, and I will put the link in the chat as well. The next reminder is around our special education itinerant or See It Academy. We are still accepting applications for our summer cohort through next Friday, the 14th. And again, if you're concerned with those increased rates of challenging behavior and want some strategies to use in the early childhood classroom, this is for you. If you want to expand your knowledge and your skills in specially designed instruction so that young children with disabilities can access the least restrictive environment, this is for you. And you'll join our friends, Dr. Kate Aceta and Tanya Hutchinson, for this academy, where you can work as a district team to reduce those challenging behaviors and enhance the use of specially designed instruction in early childhood classrooms, allowing kiddos to access their least restrictive environment. This is completely free for everyone. It carries CEUs, and it also offers ongoing flexible coaching opportunities with Tanya, and that's during and after completion of this 12-week program. So if you have questions, just let me know. I'll also put that in the chat. And then just to kind of save the dates for you all, our Early Childhood Inclusion Conference is happening on September 25th this year. It will be at R2I2 in Columbia again, and we'll have more information coming out soon. So if you are not on our newsletter, I'd suggest to subscribe because we'll have some call for proposals and other things coming out soon. And then the last reminder is, I know you all are aware of SC Team Summer University. Skippy and our partner program, Pyramid Pieces, will be there on June 10th and 11th to talk about exploring program-wide pyramid model implementation and behavior supports, as well as looking at the early childhood indicators and focusing on supporting embedded instruction and specially designed instruction within our early learning classrooms. So we hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Just like to remind everyone that our next meeting information session is on Tuesday, March 18th, again from 3 to 4. Thank you very much for your time today.